David,
Here.
Seth is absent. Sarah? Here. Catherine? Here. Bill? Is absent. Libby? Here. Robert? Here. Miles?
Here.
Samir is absent. Christopher?
Here.
John?
Here.
Tiffany?
Here.
Todd? Tanya? BJ is out. Sashi? Here. Zona is absent. I'm here. And Alan.
So before we start on our agenda, we'll take any comments or questions from members of the public on new business. So on any topic other than the operations of the Cannabis Task Force. If anybody on the call has any questions on that, raise your hand. And we will take that comment now. Okay, if nobody has any new business, then we'll start on the first item on the agenda, first and only item. So here's the order of business. A member of the committee, the chair of the committee, Catherine Ellington, will take us through the discussions that the committee has been having on the review criteria. Members of the committee can then ask questions or make comments. After that, we'll take comments from the public. After all public comment has been received, we'll enter into the business session of the committee where only committee members will discuss the matter with no further input from the public unless requested by the chair. And finally, if appropriate, we will craft a motion and take a vote, although for tonight's topic, that is not the plan. After the last agenda item, we'll adjourn the meeting. And for members of the committee, we have some administrative items that we'll cover after the Cannabis Task Force agenda item. So when we do open it up to public comment, if you wish to speak, you'll use the raise hand button. We then promote you to a panelist. You can unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and please introduce yourself to the committee. So the one item on the agenda today is a review of the criteria that the Cannabis Task Force has been using to determine CV5's approval or denial of retail dispensary licenses. New license types, which require community board notice, like on-site consumption and delivery, and a micro business license category, are coming down the pike, and we may need to adjust our criteria for those new methods of operation. Catherine Ellington will walk us through the discussions that the task force has been having on that subject.
Sure. So good evening, everyone. I think what we're gonna do is just start with a little bit of reflection. It's been a year, just 12 months since the Community Board 5 Task Force formed and developed guidelines. And I just want people to, I don't know if we're putting up the slides yet, but I do want people to look at the 4 points that shape and guide the task force. The task force is been working pretty much as a working group. We have developed guidelines that are on our website that shape the fabric of how we interact with cannabis applicants. The task force itself comprises of Community Board 5 members from the SLAP committee and at large, as well as public members and neighborhood organizations. So over the last year, we started out by meeting with conditional card licensing applications. We, in all cases, we meet with an applicant not to deliberate. The process starts by which an applicant applies to the Office of Cannabis Management for a license. And in the approval process, once they are given the first green light, they submit what is known as an OCM notification to Community Board 5, letting us know that they are intending to open a business. At that point, because this is all new for everyone, there is no subject matter expert. We have sat with cannabis applicants in a way that, in a more informal way. So we have been able to help them understand what it means to be good neighbors, what it means to engage community, and where to find adversaries, allies, all those kinds of things in the district, on the ground. And so most of them are new, have been new. Most of them had been, so we reviewed those resolutions are on the website again. We reviewed those applicants, most of them, except one, were denied. The one that was approved is worth looking at because they were engaged in community. And we've heard all kinds of things. We've gotten to know a lot about their process. They've gotten to understand our lay of the land. So again, what I want to clarify is that we've met with applicants, we've engaged in applicants in the absence of on-site visits, in the absence of due diligence that would be historically understood in our liquor license process. We've engaged, we posted public notices in all cases, in those early cases for comments. Somewhere around, I don't know, November, we started to get an avalanche of applications that will be well beyond our capacity to review and to comment on. And so what I would say is that if you look at the fullness of our guidelines, we very rarely have gotten down to like noise mitigation or other parts of the guidelines. But we decided to focus in on the appropriateness of the location, given the kind of business that it's in, and these guidelines about distances and about the types of organizations that are surrounding a business are relevant. Given, for example, that on the menus of some of the product menus of some of these locations are products, they're edible, they look like gummies, they look like things children might eat. So we wanted to specifically speak from our perspective on the appropriateness. And thankfully, we've had a number of Community Board 5 members. I have to thank Janice and Bradley, and it's been overwhelming to kind of come up with the algorithm, David, Todd, to come up with an algorithm where we understand where an applicant is and be able to comment. We also have an online, in response to receiving a OCM notification, we do send the applicant an online questionnaire that gives us a little more insight into their business practices, their methods of operations, are they holding a lease? Are they still looking to, where are they in the process? So the online, I think between December and January, we reviewed more than 100 applications and for appropriateness, and we got something like 60 odd online responses. So we do understand that this is an evolving process for everyone involved. And we have, as the task force meets as a mixed body, we have deliberated only in Slack. We have, again, used the tools that we use. We've used public notices to allow for comments. We've used, we've come before SLAP in the formal way. Applicants prior to the avalanche of applications came before SLAP. They presented their business. They were able to ask questions. And we have found most applicants, locations not suitable, but we have found applicants themselves to be just right on, people who are really trying to open up their own businesses, cannabis businesses. The process is ever evolving. I think just as of the 16th of February, OCM has now issued another round of licensees, and they are starting to build in an ongoing process. We also, what I wanted to also add, we also asked cannabis applicants to post their own public notices, and we'll talk about that more later in this process, because public notification is a part of our process that makes input possible, that we are not arbitrarily making decisions, that we are hearing in ways from community that sometimes maps could never tell us, that algorithms and data could not tell us. So I hope that gives us some sense of what we've been up to as a task force, and also listening to all the things that people are reading about in the news. We've been trying to synthesize that and trying to give weight to that in the process that we make as suggestion to slap into the full board. Thank you.
Let me just ask a couple of questions of you, Catherine.
Sure.
You had shared with us some areas where you thought you might be making adjustments to the criteria. And can you talk a little bit about what you see might be changing on future applications?
You mean by the applicants themselves?
No, in terms of how we apply our criteria to future applications.
So I think the on-site visit is an area that comes to mind, but in terms of the specific guidelines, as an overview, for example, you want me to go into the proposed changes, David? Okay, so we're taking a closer look at sort of the distance analysis that we've been doing with the distance between locations, the distance from a school, what is a school, what is a harm reduction facility, and are there areas that we can actually look a little more closely at, because the area community has told us, the data tells us that maybe we could do some restrictive, we could think about restrictive licensing. So for example, the first thing that comes up is that there is an OCN rule that talks about cannabis locations being 1,000 feet in terms of distance from each other, and that's in our guidelines, but that is an OCM measurement, and so we don't need to hold that in our guidelines. That would be an example. The other is the way in which OCM describes a school is not the way schools exist in New York City. Schools are in hybrid buildings all over Manhattan. And so we want to give further definition to what we mean when we say schools. And the other part is the harm reduction facilities that are in CB5. I think it's been eye-opening to note the number of social service organizations, also compounded by the number of emergency facilities now open because of the migrant communities. So we want to take a closer look at some parts of the district where we know that there are significant amounts of people who are in recovery and moving through the area. There's a significant amount of homelessness, as well as drug activity and crime, that these are all things that work together. And we also want to perhaps lift the POPs and our understanding of public and private spaces, that they're not all created equal, that some of them are problematic and challenging, but others don't necessarily indicate that there are risks to be next to or nearby. So we just want to add some specificity to that area. We also want to give our own definitions to how we measure. I think we talked about how the crow flies and walking distance, and where the sources of our open data, so that people understand, again, that we're not arbitrarily setting distances and guidelines. People could come up with the same answers themselves.
The other question I had was, we talk about comparing the cannabis process to the SLA process for alcohol licenses. And I mean, the difference here, I guess, was that we had, 200 applications in a 3-month period, and we're not deciding whether these licenses get approved or not. They're going to go through a process with OCM and the Cannabis Board. So is the intention that once a decision is made to grant a license to one of these 200 operators, at that point, we'll engage them in the due diligence
So where
process?
do we, so we need to engage them at the point, like in the SLA process, when they send us an OCM notification and they're holding, if they're holding a lease, then we can do a site visit.
Right.
Right? And so that becomes one of the parts, the way this process is set up, that's significantly different than SLA, is that there is no hearing process. One of the things about SLA that I appreciate when I've been out posting, SLA posts.
Right.
When they're gonna hear an application, they post. There's no posting by OCM, and there should be. I didn't necessarily recognize that, and so until just recently, I recognized, and there was no public hearing of these applications by OCM, whereas SLA is a public process. Again, I say to you, the SLA is 100 years in the making, and we're in year 2.
Right. So,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, and I was just gonna say, and just for history's sake and for the record, when the SLA was being formed and way back when, there was a decision made, for those who are history buffs, not, cannabis goes back this far. Marijuana was something on the plate 100 years ago that is just now showing up. So, we are not talking about something what I try to tell people is that we're talking about something that is already here. And so we're not here to decide if it's not gonna be here, because it's been here as long as alcohol has been here. So probably before then, if you wanna be ancient about it. But anyway, so
So again, just to focus on this one question of when do we engage with these applications? So taking the 200 applications, whatever the number was that we got over the course of the last quarter of last year, we're not gonna, well, are we gonna engage with individual applicants? In a lot of cases, there were multiple applications for single locations. So our approach originally was, well, let's just look at the location and we'll focus on the operator once we know whether that operator is actually going to be moving forward. Is that where we are? Have we changed our position on this?
So if we still are getting so this is what I'll say to this. I think the analysis that we do helps OCM, and it helps us, and it helps the applicant. So I think that becomes part of the process when we get an application, that we do our measuring and we inform what we believe as a community board to be what should be, what we see. I think that helps. Their process, I think, from what I feel going forward with OCM, they're listening. And so we have the right to weigh in, and they expect us to weigh in. There is a document called Community Board from the OCM, what community boards do. And that document talks about, we have a role. So I think even if we deny unless, or, that process, I think that the data is helpful because it's data, it's objective.
Right. And look, the biggest overriding issue coming out of our process is we formed the criteria by listening to the community.
Right.
And a series of individual criteria, but when you take them in combination, it results in a large number of denials. And so, we've all been having a lot of questioning about, what's the right outcome here? And for that matter, if we believed in the criteria, why would we be changing it? Can you give us some sense of how the task force has been
So I
looking at
think
this issue?
he's not here tonight, but I do want to thank Bradley. Bradley did some overlays of some of our criteria, and when we looked at it, it does look prohibitive. Well, what I feel that we're doing, for the most part, is giving character to broad regulations. We're bringing specificity. That's really what the goal is. And where we need to let go, for example, the 1,000 foot, we're letting go. If we don't need it, it's not helpful. But it is particularly helpful to talk about where children are in proximity to these locations with a great deal of specificity, and we need to be able to do that. Not just the public school buildings, but if kids are kids wherever they go to school. So that's why we wanted to be able to speak to some of these. And then, like I said, I think the eye-opening part was just the sheer number of harm reduction facilities in specific areas where there are also, we want to be futuristic. We don't want to have a situation where significant numbers of licenses are granted and places become grandfathered. We see that a lot with SLA. And now these are residential areas. So sometimes we're also trying to look at what will zoning tell us about what a particular area will be like
Right.
in a few years.
And I mean, one of the examples that came up was that the language from OCM was that, you know, if a school is on the same road, then you apply the 500 feet. It's like, okay, that's one that clearly doesn't seem to work
Right.
in our district.
Sure.
So I did want to share, I watched the video of your last meeting, and I can't really put this up on the screen. I don't know if you have this image, but this was if you took all of our criteria.
Right, that's Bradley's analysis.
This was Bradley's, this was kind of the bottom line. And if you took all of the criteria, then, you know, this is what's left, right? I mean, it's Swiss cheese, I suppose, but white parts are what's left. And so you could look at that and you could say, wow, that's really restrictive. And then one of the comments from, I think, one of the public members was, well, it gets something like 8 or 10, you know, licenses within the district, and we don't have a particular goal for the number of licenses, but it meets the 1,000-foot separation and it spreads them out. It just happens to spread them out through the community. So it wasn't clear that this is necessarily a bad answer. It is a restrictive answer.
And it is a restrictive answer in the context of, you know, we don't talk about this, but with illegal shops, with not a lot of enforcement and control, one of the ways we talked about pop spaces, and I had this conversation with an applicant, you know, are people, it is still true that 75% of people who use cannabis smoke. So are they gonna walk outside? Are they gonna go in a cannabis shop, sit outside in a pop space and smoke? And who's gonna enforce? You know, it becomes a question of enforceability. As the landscape changes, we're not hard, but what I will also say is that we established guidelines. There was an applicant who came and who read the guidelines, engaged in community, and that's what we want applicants to do. We don't want to be telling you where you can and cannot run your business. We want you to be the kind of business where you're a good neighbor, or you even know your neighbors, that we're not, and it's very important personally, that we not be strangers to ourselves,
Right.
that we would be neighbors. For a lot of these applicants, what you're dealing with is people who don't have access to real estate, don't have access. And so to find friends, allies, no adversaries and enemies are just as important as the product that you're selling, because you're trying to be a vibrant business. What does a vibrant cannabis business look like in a neighborhood?
And I'll just make one more comment and then we'll open it up, you know, for the rest of the committee. But, you know, the other thing that's on here is the 1,000-foot radius is the red dot. And if you look at the number of card licenses, so each time a license is approved, a licensee is essentially granted exclusivity in a 1,000-foot radius around their location, at least for now. It doesn't take very many of those licenses to fill up Community District 5. So a lot of the question on our side has been, okay, there are 200 applications. You're never going to get 200 stores because they'll all interfere with each other. We found a lot of focus, a lot of concentration in particular parts of the district.
Really?
So the answer may be that a lot of the discussion and a lot of the time we've been spending on individual applicants, at the end of the day, you're not gonna have anywhere near that number of successful applicants. And, you know, that's where, at that point, we can engage with the ones that have been granted licenses, go through our full due diligence process and get a better understanding, you know, as you've been saying, Catherine, about what style of operator are they gonna be?
Yeah.
And how cooperative will they be with the community and with us? And do that for the limited number of groups that are actually gonna be operating. So one of the questions, I guess.
And the other question becomes, we're not yet seeing on-site consumption licenses. What do those look like?
Right.
I was like, are they gonna be coffee shops that are consumption? And what does that hold? That has the potential, but as you state, the applicants that we're seeing now are for cannabis retail dispensary operations, and there's just a lot of them.
Right.
And we wanna be able to speak to whoever wants to be able to speak to us, but at the same time, we wanna honor our process.
Right, okay. Sorry for bogarting the discussion. So if anybody else has any comments or
Well,
questions or,
before,
I mean, as our, of the,
yeah, but even before we open up to the committee, I just wanted to share sort of what the process has been like so far, so everyone has that context. So, just to frame the conversation, you know, as Catherine had already alluded to, you know, when we were thinking about how this review process was going to work, you know, we want to keep everyone in mind, and that includes the applicant, the community, and of course, you know, we play a role in this by balancing the interests of both those parties. You know, when we think about what our objective is, in regard to what it is that the applicant wants and what the community wants and what we're trying to do, you know, we can kind of think about it as maybe, you know, we want to help the applicant engage with the community, as Catherine said. You know, what that might look like is an indicator of that, like what the success of that would look like is, you know, we help them create a questionnaire that like actually they want to answer and that I try to answer accurately. For the community who wants to ensure a reasonable quality of life for themselves, you know, they want to hear that their concerns have been heard and represented. And something that might be representative of that is that, you know, they have the chance to go and meet with the applicants. And then for us, you know, we want to conduct the due diligence that we do, you know, with liquor license applications and go through that whole process and spend the time that every applicant deserves to, you know, have their application reviewed fully and not, you know, not just location, of course. Yeah. And yeah, just to go over the process so far, as Catherine already started talking about, you know, the Cannabis Task Force was established back in October 22. You know, they came up with guidance based on what the community had said. We had created resolutions with these recommendations to OCM and New York State. And then from there, you know, there was a period where we were able to dedicate attention to these applications. And again, as Catherine said, we denied 4, and then with 1, we were able to craft an affidavit based on what the community wanted. And, you know, issued our typical deny unless you follow those conditions. But then, you know, in last fall, we were hit with, you know, like 72 applications and then another 45. And just to explain to people, okay, what happened in between, right? So we didn't have the time to look at those applications, all 72 of those applications. So we just focused on locations. We found that 9, you know, did not meet our guidelines, and 24 were, sorry, I might have switched that, actually. 24 locations were denied and 9 were denied unless we were given the opportunity to review those applications further. And that was just through ad hoc methods where I think people were just literally trying to search for places of interest on Google, like, oh, that looks like it's next to a park, and then try to take measurements that way. And we came up with very inconsistent results, as
The
I'm sure.
criteria were the same, but
Yeah, the criteria were the same, but in terms of like our ability to surface those different facilities.
Right.
Was not really a reliable method. So that is why for the following round of applications, we revised the process so that it was a lot more comprehensive and objective and scientific. And that way, we were able to, from a more comprehensive list of facilities, determine whether these locations, I should say, were compliant or not. And that really explains, why there were inconsistencies over these two review processes. I know some applicants, if you're listening, are confused about that, but it really is just a matter of us evolving our process as the state continues to evolve their process. So from here. Yeah, so I can just show a quick demo of what that improved method was. So, that second time around, we discovered data from the New York City Capital Planning Explorer. This is something, if you Google it, you can access it. You can filter it down to our district. So that's basically what you see there, as well as the types of facilities. So we basically checked off the ones that aligned with the guidelines. And then before we found this, I got and just kind of like manually created Google Maps. And I think this is what Bradley based his maps on, but essentially like this is all those like potential places of interest mapped around our district. And then using this data, that was imported into a tool that we built in order to determine, based on where the applicant location would be, which one of those facilities would be, which one of the facilities from the Capital Planning Explorer data was within a certain radius of the location. And then once that was determined, we could take the measurements in Google Maps. So really quickly, I'll just show you. Yeah, so this is the Capital Planning Explorer. They have different facility types. So the ones that are checked off and then exported were education, child welfare and youth facilities, parks, gardens and historical sites, libraries and cultural programs, and health and human services. And this data is not perfect. A lot of it, sometimes it's more of like a corporate address or people have moved. So it did still need to be manually checked. And so a lot of it was cross-referenced with this map. And this map includes a lot of schools that are not part of that data. It includes places of worship, which are not part of that data. Harm reduction facilities, which are not part of that data, and also very difficult to find. And then public parks, which includes the ones with trees, I think are what you would think of as a park, and then the Ps are the plops. And that also includes plops that the plops haven't been cleaned up in terms of they're sort of whatever kind of space they are. And playgrounds. Although in our district, really the only playground that has come up is the police officer Moira Smith playground, which is in Madison Square Park. So it kind of gets knocked out anyway, typically. So from there, the data from the facilities database was imported into a Google Sheet. From here, there's a calculator to determine distances, and then using this finder, you can actually look up based on the geographical coordinates of the location of which facilities are near there. So for example, if I choose 142 West 34th Street, you can see it pulls up a list of facilities that are within in this case, 600-foot radius of that address. And then what we did was, we just go in, copy and paste that out and then manually check all of these. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's a very methodical process. I don't want people to think that, this was sort of like a haphazard way of doing things. Yeah, that's basically how we came up with the recent measurements.
And do we have any sense what other community boards are doing? I mean, whether the methodology is the same, but do we think they're looking at it the same way we are?
So I've tried to look, I've been very focused, but I'll just say this, I think we've gotten more applications than anyone. I think, I do know the one thing I will say, as I've been out and about the city, community boards have been posting their cannabis applications on the street. Because I've been walking around and I'm like, every place I look, cannabis is coming up for me, but so it is that to me is noteworthy, but I think, from what I can see, there haven't been as many applications. I don't know if they've held off, like I said, until an applicant actually is holding a lease. Before they move to have a discussion. But I will say in the process that isn't always clear. At the point in which the applicant has sent notification to the community board of its intention to open a business, that means that they've gotten a recommendation from OCM. And that recommendation there's an open window between that recommendation and the Cannabis Control Board's approval by resolution or disapproval of the list of applicants. Again, we're in a very early process. There is no hearing. OCM has done some due diligence. And by the time they get to the control board meeting, those applicants are actually approved. They are approved, for very short amounts of time. But I guess the expectation is that renewals will come. These are 4-year applications in which the Cannabis Control Board has says input is ongoing. So this is a new process. So I feel as though, although we have a 60-day, we try to give ourselves a 60-day window, which is the maximum amount of time. It's just not a lot of time, just that we know from SLA applications that it's not a lot of time, but most of the applicants are willing and eager. That's why I'm eager to see how we will start to do on-site visits and move these applicants through our site process.
Okay, let's open it up to the committee. Anybody? Oh, you have more? Sorry.
Yeah. So just so people are aware, our guidelines, when we were doing the review, they were referencing this guidance for adult use retail dispensaries, which was last updated February 1st, 2023. And this is a screenshot from today, so it's still there, for people to access. And in particular, from that guidance, we got a definition of a community facility, which is where that idea of like any facility that really serves children, is something that we would require like a 500-foot walking distance from. However, we have been recently informed that the term has actually been further narrowed to a public youth facility. But again, just so everyone knows, the community facility that we were discussing is really around this concept with these examples here. And, referencing like Catherine had touched upon earlier, just the fact that, unlike the rest of New York State, New York City and our district in particular is just so dense that, we have special requirements that should be considered. And, around that really centers around schools, for example, like charter schools in particular, serve a good chunk of our students, and that's something unique to our city, and they often don't occupy their own spaces. Houses of worship apart from a handful of churches and synagogues, most congregations from all different faiths do not have their own space in the city. So there's just something to keep in mind. And then in terms of, I guess, like additional requirements, so as I said, the community facility definition was revised to a public use facility, which is defined now as a facility that primarily serves children, but is government owned. But for our purposes, our guidelines was referring to the old definition of community facility. And then we also have that 1,000 foot of a playground requirement, which I'm pretty sure other community boards have as well. The requirement for harm reduction facility, there's no mention of that in the state regulations. But again, given how many facilities we have within the city, we require 500 feet. And then we also have like a time restriction for residences, again, given the density of our district. Something that other places in the state probably don't need to worry about as much as we do. But again, just emphasizing the fact that we do have, we live in a very different environment from the rest of the state. And, much like the SLA that does grant special requirements, like coming to the community board for review, that's possibly something that we should be pushing for this review as well. So, okay, now we'll be quiet. Everyone wants to talk.
Todd, Todd, you have your hand up? You want to unmute yourself, Todd? And
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes, I
Can
can
you
hear
hear-
you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't have the best internet connection. I'm just going to make it brief. First of all, I want to say that I am in agreement with what my fellow task force members have said. I just have a few things that I would like to add. The first thing is, the whole issue of enforcement that has come up. I signed in a little late. I may not have heard what Catherine has to say, but the whole issue of the utter failure or lack of effectiveness on enforcement has colored everything that has been mentioned and discussed today. In other words, the standards and the perception by the community of what's acceptable in terms of the distance limitations and where valid dispensaries can be located has been turned on its ear. So, I think what we have to do, our committee and as a community board, is be forceful and use the influence we have to get the state and our elected officials and the public agencies that are responsible for enforcement to keep after this. So that may require letters by our community board and our committee on this point, and it requires making sure that our information and the feedback that we get with those terrific maps and everything else that we've done is seen and heard. The other thing is, and I say this is just my opinion, and I'm going to bring this up at our task force, which if you look at those maps that basically leave 5% of our district available for legal dispensaries, right? I mean, the settled law and the opinion of, I think, a settled majority of our state is that there should be legal dispensaries with all the standards and protections for the public in effect in New York City, and that includes our district. And I don't know when the community board passed its standards, it's evolved even since then. I don't know that we can be an effective and fair advocate for the community if it turns out that, given the standards that we voted on, that 95% of the district is off limits. So, this goes back to the issue of enforcement. It could be that if they got rid of all the illegal dispensaries, then our residents and our neighbors would take a different view of what should be allowed in their neighborhood. They can't imagine it now because they're overrun by the illegal dispensaries. So, and that goes to what I heard, what Catherine said, which as the evidence and our research comes through, I think it may be necessary for us as a committee to bring back to the full board a new way of looking at this. And that might include, as the way Catherine mentioned, that maybe a restricted licensing area, or looking at the numbers from the maps, carving out areas where without the illegal dispensaries, it might be proper to have a certain number of dispensaries. So I say that, you know, in full support of what our committee is doing. And then the last thing I would say is just our role requires that we do our due diligence in a similar and traditional way as we've done for the SLA, right? But one of the things that's become clear in our dealings with the cannabis, with CCB, and the officials that are implementing this is that they can't get their heads around the overall importance of what we're doing, right? They view us, if you look at the flyers and the kind of comments that come back when we talk with them at our meetings, they're not persuaded, I think, of the role and the value of this data and feedback on a granular basis that we're giving them. So we've got to hold their feet to the fire, and we've got to use what influence we have to try to persuade them as best we can. Anyway, thank you, Catherine, and to all of the task force. You guys have all done so much good work, and I hope that, you know, as the evidence comes in and we continue to study this issue, that we can be effective and do our job.
Thanks, Todd. Actually, sorry, so this is not a business session, so this is just questions?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to, this is a process question, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the process. So a location comes in, we do an initial allocation screen, as Jan showed us. Most of the time, that location is going to end up in this black zone, which I'm holding up. Is the process with that, with all the applicants at any of those locations end there?
It doesn't have to be. It could be
Okay.
a starting point. So what we say is that if we don't hear from you, we want to be able to say that we said something about the applicant, right? So they notify us. We ask them to send us more details in the online application.
Okay,
They can ask to meet with us if they like.
got it, okay.
They could ask, and so, like I said, the one approval that we did, they met with us. They did a lot of the due diligence to talk about the neighborhood, and that's how we came to an approval based on stipulation, you know, some of this will be stipulation, but, it's a tool.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I mean, I've heard all kinds of things in terms of responses to, you know, I'm like, do you know, there are two illegal shops
Right, yeah,
and you're gonna be in the middle, how do you feel about that? And they're like, oh, you know, well, do you know there's a school around the corner? What's your plan? You know, there's a park right across the street, you know.
right, okay. I was just gonna make a comment too, kind of.
Yeah.
I want to echo what Todd said. So first of all, this is a tremendous amount of work. So thank you. And everything that we've seen is a tremendous amount of work. So thank you so much. I'm really intrigued by Todd's, you know, recommendation. I'm sure you guys have all been talking about, which is, you know, thinking about this in the future, potentially not on a location by location basis, but in a more RLA, not RLA sort of way. So I'm intrigued by that, and I encourage the committee to continue to think about what that might
Can I
look like
just
for our
talk
district.
about- David, make one comment. So one of the things you talk about, the conversation that we have back and forth, we talk in our guidelines about hours of operation. And there was a shift in applications, especially with these large groups of applications. More than 95% of the applicants were in agreement about our hours of operation. So we don't have to go through, and it started out, we're gonna be open till 4 AM.
Right.
I'm like, well, I don't care what you're doing. If you tell this neighborhood you're gonna be open at 4 AM, they're gonna show up and they're gonna tell you you're not. So that's what I'm talking about, what guidelines do. So then when I asked in the online application, would you be willing? And then we're increasingly gonna be talking to applicants that are in mixed use buildings. There's already one operation open, and yes, so there have been applicants that have been denied that are now open. There are a few cannabis operations open in our neighborhood, and that's the other part of the education process. You should use the verification tool, you should walk by, you should see what you see and don't see.
Mhm.
I didn't see crowds the day I was there, doesn't mean there aren't crowds.
Mhm.
You know, but you can see these, you should be familiar with these applications, these operations that are open. Sorry, I didn't mean to go way off, but
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to make that example about method of operation.
Yeah.
That when we started this process, many people were telling us that we're gonna be open till 4 AM, and we were like, but why? You know, what's the rationale? Especially if are you delivering at that hour? And in all cases now, applicants they respond to that part of the guideline.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I have questions about the on-site part, or the one, when are those coming down the pipe and
Consumption. Yep.
the on-site consumption ones? And then about the slide, Janice, that you showed about residents, proximity to residences for on-site consumption. Curious about on-site, when are these happening? And then also the part on the slide about the residential, proximity.
So we don't have dates and timelines, and it started in the beginning. Some of the applicants were telling us that they were gonna be on-site applications, but now all the applicants are just retail only. They're not on site, because on-site also becomes events, it becomes, you know, that's why if you move down in the guidelines, we talk about noise, we talk about smell, we talk, you know, again, I point to the fact that 75% of cannabis users are smokers. And so if you're in a, you know, what kind of ventilation are you gonna have and those kinds of things, but we haven't heard, we haven't seen applications come forward.
Can I
Yeah,
ask a follow-up to that?
Sure, yep, keep going.
Is OCM currently accepting on-site? Is this kind of staggered in a way that like those would come later?
so right, so it's unclear, it's not
clear, okay.
clear whether the retail, so it looks like some of the retail organizations would, on a separate addendum or another process, be able to apply to become consumption licenses. That's one part of it. Then there is the consumption only part of it.
Yeah.
What I also encourage people to do is so what's important that we miss too is that the dispensary and the on-site consumption location is the end of the ecology. There's a whole ecology, there's a whole system being born here. I was at an OCM, I was listening to OCM hearing and I forgot, there are research facilities being funded to make sure that the product that the cannabis location is not only 100% made in New York, but it's also 100% free of pests and other things that can find themselves into cannabis, which is another way to talk about illegal shops, like what are you selling, right? But anyway, so the answer to your question is, you know, one, I don't know exactly when, and two, to remind people that there is a whole cultivator process, there's a whole micro business, and a lot of the ways in which these are put together in New York are very specific and that these dispensaries are the last part of the chain.
I just had a follow-up on the use part of it. That will also count with the OCM 1,000-foot rule of it, like can't be within 1,000 feet of a dispensary, or is it just 1,000? Like, does that become a second layer of it? So they can be, if it's two different operators, say, not the same operator in the same physical location, which I imagine is just an expanded license, like modification versus a two slightly different things, like could those locations be next to each other and you have like two layers of like, one is like, so that
The
like
liquor
these,
store next to a bar.
yeah, so that like these spots can be like both. Like two things could be on the same block, one, and they're totally not related businesses, but one is just like a, I don't know, a wine bar, but a cannabis bar, and the other one is a dispensary that like only does delivery, only does takeout.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Futuristic question.
Good question.
Okay.
Wonderful question. Futuristic, the only understanding that I have is that, you know, we would see method of operation applications for cannabis licenses that have been issued. If you're gonna start to have consumption on site, that's a change in business. And we, you know, that's
For
all
our
I,
existing,
right.
yeah.
But in terms of, right, that's the futuristic question. What will this change into, right? It starts out one way and then you have all these grandfathered licensees that you can't necessarily tell to go away. And what will it look like? So is it, what's important? And I raised that, you know, what's important?
I keep looking at the one in Union Square. It's totally empty. I never see anyone around. I don't know why. I'm not a customer, so leave it alone.
Can I ask, Janice, would you mind clarifying in the slide related to, it was like the last slide of the chart that talked about residential proximity and on-site consumption?
So that's just in our guidelines, if I'm not mistaken, that's where I pulled it from.
That like, that CB5 wouldn't allow on-site consumption within 500 feet of residential?
Oh, so it's more like if you are within 500 feet, then you have to have those hours.
Oh,
You
okay.
can't go beyond those hours.
I see, I see.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? So I think the next steps on this, Catherine, are, you know, to the extent that the task force is looking to revise any of this or to change methodology for subsequent license types. So this discussion would go back to the task force. And, you know, at the appropriate point, you know, you'll have a set of recommendations. Those will come here. We'll actually have a vote at that point, and then it would be, you know, referred up to the board to, you know, it's kind of how a bill becomes law. So we'll, you know, tonight was a hearing just to sort of air these issues. I also got, you know, I think we all got the sense this started, you know, when Nick was still chair, was that this has been going on in the background. There's been a lot of issues, and this would be a chance to sort of let everybody get up to speed on that, so that when you ultimately do come back, everybody has the background. Okay, we'll open it up to the public. If anybody has a comment, and we'll see if anybody has questions. And again, if you raise your hand, and then we'll recognize you, and we'll ask you to unmute yourself and turn your camera on. Okay, yeah, Fazia, you can go ahead. If you'll unmute yourself and turn your camera on, please.
Sure, just one moment. Don't know why I don't know technology very well. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, I don't seem to understand how to show my video.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, is that okay? Okay. Well, hi. I'm from Indoor Trees. We're a card license dispensary. We had spoken to a few of you guys that were on the cannabis task force. And I just wanted to say hi. This was all very informative. I'm super new to just this industry in general and just, being a part of just any community. So I do appreciate for Josh having put me
Want me to drive back, Brett?
hello?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and I just had a few questions. Just because I would like to be more connected. I saw and I made an effort to reach out to I believe Jerry from where is that?
Sure, from the Garment District Alliance.
Yeah, and I
Fabio.
actually
So,
didn't
yes,
realize that there was another partnership, which is a Flatiron Nomad partnership. And I see that.
Sure.
Yeah, and I just want to know if there's like a maybe like a contact list, or if there's or if there's anyone in particular that I should be reaching out to. I've been like bugging Josh um pretty frequently through the weeks
Sure.
to kind of get in contact with folks, just because we are planning on opening. I mean, our opening date is kind of just in the air right now. What with OCM, we're still waiting for, them to do what they need to do, which they're taking their sweet time, which we have no issues with. But we do want to be able to plan accordingly for our opening, just because we're getting news that brands want to come out and they want to do like a smaller event. And I just want to know who I should be speaking to or how I can plan this. Again, just coordinating with what you guys are comfortable with and also what's comfortable to the community. We don't want to overstep or make anyone uncomfortable. I know that the block that we're on, for anyone who's not familiar, we're on 8th Avenue between 38th and 39th. So that's a big bulk of like traffic that gets through there. And we just want to know what would be appropriate. We were discussing myself, and I also have Sarah, who's also watching right now. We just wanted to ask, who should we talk about when it comes to barricades? Who should we talk about with the small event permits, and so on and so forth? I don't know who would be the best person.
Hi, Fazio, can I respond? Sure. Hi, it's
Hi.
Catherine Fazio. So Indoor Trees did meet with the task force, I want to say just last week or the week before. And we started the conversation. You can follow up with Josh and myself about other partnerships. I did see a note from Jerry at the Garment District Alliance, and this is the kind of interaction we want to see happening. So please reach out to Garment District and we'll connect you with some others shortly. We'll follow up with you to give you some other places where you can get some input and insight into the neighborhood. But we're glad of your persistent outreach. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was it for me. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Thanks. Anybody else from the public with any questions or comments? Nope. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the committee?
So with our recommendations, so we're not quite ready to vote on the recommendations. We would take this to the next slide meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
so
fine.
the handful of items we talked about at the beginning, that you mentioned, the adjustment to, removing the 1,000-foot rule from our list. What's the definition of a school? The harm reduction facility, and I know there was a concept of perhaps having like an RLA, a restricted area. So all of that would have to be, and the pops. That would just have to be defined to the point where,
We can move.
you can move it here and then we'd be able to take it to the full board. Yeah,
Got it.
recognizing once, when we get to the full board, it's 50 people who don't necessarily have the same background. So.
And so that's why we felt this process and this meeting was important, because we want people to see the larger picture. so they can be informed on the details and you won't be at a board meeting trying to figure out how we got here.
Yeah,
So-
exactly.
And
Thank you.
we're happy to talk with folks, and if any of you wanna be on the task force, come on, let us know. It's an exciting time to pay attention. And so.
Right, yeah, and just to, reiterate what people have been saying, just the quantity of work that has gone into this in a short period of time. And, even unlike the SLA stuff, that's a defined process. We've been doing it for a long time. This has all been created, anew.
Yeah,
So really appreciate the effort that you and the task force, Janice, Bradley, everybody have been doing in order to help us define this. All right, so we're gonna end this portion of the meeting. We're going to sign off the public attendees. And we just have some administrative items that we're gonna cover. We're gonna stop the recording. So thank you very much, and we'll adjourn the meeting. If committee members will stay on though.